Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Political Talks JB. I am your host, Julian Boykin, and today I am joined by Mr. John Myrick, who is running for governor of Maryland. John, how's it going tonight?
It's going wonderful, Julian. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with me. Tell everybody a little bit about your background and you running for governor.
Well, I appreciate that. As we talked about earlier, I'm John Myrick. I'm a Republican candidate for governor of Maryland. I'm a Marylander. I grew up here in Maryland. My family's been in Maryland since 1640, so this is home. Um, I was educated in the Maryland public school system out in Harford County, where I grew up. Uh, Went to college here in Maryland initially and started out my career as a Harford County deputy sheriff up in Harford County, protecting Marylanders in their homes. So I'm the only candidate for governor who's actually worn a badge. Um, After doing that for a couple of years, I got recruited over to work federal. I was a counterintelligence and intelligence agent for over 30 years for the U.S. government, protecting Americans far away from their homes in places they never even heard of. While I did that, I flew for 10 years and served 23 years in the U.S. Air Force Reserve. I'm a highly decorated combat veteran. Unlike our current governor, I can actually account for every one of my combat decorations that I earned in combat in 5 different continents. I've been consulting for the federal government since I retired back in 2013 on national security issues. I'm considered an expert in asymmetric threats, and I've got leadership skills that I worked through the U.S. government. When I was with the government, I ran multi-billion-dollar programs, so I'm well acquainted with how to actually work with taxpayer dollars. And unlike, again, the current governor, I have never forgotten that I am a public servant. If somebody would have told me that I would be running for governor 18 months ago, I probably sent them for a drug test, in all honesty. There's no way I would have done this. I have very little use for politicians, and I differentiate politicians from public servants. Politicians talk about problems. Public servants solve problems. Now, I've spent my entire adult life as a public servant, and I've never forgotten that. And I will continue to do that as governor of Maryland.
Well said. When we talk about access to healthcare in rural areas, take Caroline County, for instance, they don't have a hospital. So you talking
Nope.
somebody gets sick and they need to be rushed to a hospital, they're looking at a hefty drive all the way out to Dover, Delaware, which is probably what, well over an hour?
About an hour from most places in Caroline County, yeah.
So how do we improve access to healthcare in rural areas for the people of Maryland?
Well, first off, I think we need to look at how we budget our health and human services dollars and our Department of Health money. Maryland is top heavy when it comes to the administrative bloat in Annapolis. We have, for example, we have 4 different agencies that deal with various aspects of health. Now, every one of those departments in the state of Maryland has a secretary, an assistant secretary, a deputy assistant secretary, and all the bloat that comes down with that, their own buildings, their own infrastructures. A lot of that could be consolidated, and a lot of that money could be then repurposed and reprogrammed to actually serve the needs of Marylanders. Uh, Another aspect of that is we need to work more closely with our federal partners. We have a governor who has flat out said that he will not work with this administration. Well, as the governor of a state, you have a responsibility to work with federal authorities for the benefit of the people in your state. And I don't care if it's Maryland, Alabama, Delaware, Pennsylvania, doesn't matter.
Correct.
And especially given the fact that the federal government supplies about a third of Maryland's revenues, and it's our largest employer. So you can't improve rural health care if you will not work with the Federal Department of Health and Human Services and with this administration for funding. We need to provide better access, and not just Caroline County, that's just one example. We have a lot of issues with rural healthcare here in Maryland. And again, part of that is an issue of being able to recruit medical professionals to come and work in Maryland. With our tax structure the way it is, with the exorbitant cost of living in the state of Maryland as a result of bad policy decisions, that's driving people away from settling here. You know, there's very little incentive for a doctor or a healthcare professional to come to Maryland when they can earn just as much money with a lower cost of living and lower tax burden in Virginia, Delaware, Pennsylvania, or West Virginia. So it's a matter of making Maryland more affordable to be able to recruit these people to come in and provide the services that we need.
So when we talk about being responsible with how leadership in Maryland spends money, fiscal responsibility, and right now the current administration, there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions as it relates to, for example, $800 million in overpayment for like unemployment. You got 2.9 billion in SNAP fraud, so on and so forth. How do we get a handle on fiscal responsibility with leadership running the state of Maryland?
I mean, part of it is just that it's the lack of leadership here in Maryland, and that starts at the governor's mansion, quite frankly. Accountability. You know, Marylanders have a right to know where every dime of our tax money is being spent. And right now they don't. Our comptroller can't tell us. Our governor certainly can't tell us because he doesn't know. Because he's never been interested actually in being the governor. He's had his sights set on bigger and better things since the very beginning. So what we intend to do is one of the first things we will do is we will bring in an outside auditing agency and we will audit every state department. I want to know where every dime of Maryland taxpayer money has gone, and that report will be public. And where we find waste, we're going to cut it. Where we find fraud, we will prosecute it because no one is going to steal Marylanders' money on my watch. Now, along with that, we've got a governor and a General Assembly who just obviously don't understand that you can't just keep spending money.
Correct.
You know, they act like they're spending monopoly money. And the bottom line is this isn't monopoly money. It's hard-earned taxpayer dollars out of Marylanders' pockets. And that Marylanders have a right for that money to be going where they want it and need it to go. You know, this governor came into office in 2023, January of 23, with a $5.5 billion surplus in the state treasury. Within 2 years, he ran us into a $3.5 billion deficit. I don't even know how that's possible, yet he did it. And then he raised taxes by the largest tax increase in Maryland history last year. Now, you would think that would solve the problem. No, his new budget has a $1.5 billion deficit again. So they haven't cut spending, they've actually increased it, and he keeps promising more and more money. He's announced recently, you may have heard, that the company that runs the big Sphere out there in Las Vegas, he's courted them to put a smaller version of that at the National Harbor here in Maryland in Prince George's County. And he's willing to give them $200 million in tax incentives and in direct payments to do that. This is a publicly traded company. And he's going to give them $200 million of taxpayer money when we're $1.5 billion in the hole. Wow. And here in Maryland, we have, it's constitutionally required that we have a balanced budget every year. So his $1.5 billion deficit this year is going to have to be made up with cuts, or like they're planning to do, transfer the responsibility for some of these things down to the counties, which only means more taxes for people, and tax increases. Even though he and the leadership, the Democrat leadership of our General Assembly, when they went into session on the 15th of January, they pledged no new taxes this year. Now, keep in mind, they pledged the same thing last year and increased our taxes by the largest tax increase in Maryland history, added 338 new taxes and fees last year. They promised no new taxes this year. Within 3 hours, Democrats in the General Assembly had introduced 2 new tax bills. So their no new tax pledge lasted 180 minutes and was gone. So you can't believe anything coming out of these people's mouths. It comes down to accountability, and you mentioned the fraud. $807 million in overpayments in unemployment benefits, and the state's claiming that they can't recover over $700 billion of that. 700 billion taxpayer dollars. That's fraud. $2.9 billion already reported in SNAP benefit fraud here in Maryland. No effort to go get it. We've got state employees who are billing state taxpayers for massages. It was reported recently one of them was billing $400 for massages for themselves and their coworkers to the state. Now, not only has the state not recovered that money, that employee is still employed, drawing a paycheck from the taxpayers in the state of Maryland. They didn't fire that person. No accountability. And that is wrong. Marylanders deserve to know that somebody's minding the cookie store.
So when we talk about fiscal responsibility and we talk about being able to spend money properly in the right programs that it needs to be spent, how do we factor in educational programs? You know, I know Maryland has its fair share of educational problems with teacher shortages, students being able to read at the right level, you know, even being able taking the right math courses and things of that nature. I remember a couple of years ago when we lived in Maryland, there was a report that came out. There was a young man in Baltimore that went from like 9th grade to 12th grade, but barely took any classes. GPA might have been below a 2.0, and it kind of just went unnoticed. How do we get a better handle on our young people and making sure that they have options? If they don't want to go to college, they can do trade, you know, vocational technical training, things of that nature, cybersecurity training, getting certifications.
Right.
How do we set those programs up for our young people?
We have a lot of ideas on that, obviously, and that's one of the main reasons that I selected for my lieutenant governor running mate, Dr. Brenda J. Cham. Dr. Cham is an educator. She's been a special education teacher in our Washington County public school system for almost 30 years. She holds a PhD in special education leadership. She's also a former member of the Maryland House of Delegates, the first African-American woman in history to serve in that body as a Republican. So she's a trailblazer as well. She sees what's wrong and what's happening in the classroom every day. You know, Maryland passed this blueprint for education over the objections of our last governor in 2022. It's programmed to dump an additional $10 billion over the next 10 years into our education system, a system that's hopelessly broken as it sits. Maryland right now spends more than 37 other states in the country on education, an average of about $20,000 across the state per pupil. Yet our 4th and 8th graders read and do math consistently at below the national average. That is not a good return on the Maryland taxpayer investment. And throwing more money at a broken system is never the answer. We need to gut the blueprint because it's going to bankrupt the state. And we need to come up with real solutions. We have plans to put certification programs as early on as middle school for cybersecurity and IT type certifications. That can be done at almost zero cost to the state. We want to bolster our trades programs here in the state of Maryland, because you're right, not every student is destined for college. There are some students who just want to go out into the workforce, or who, quite frankly, are not ready to go to college, or are not programmed to go to college, but they need options. So we need to bolster our vocational and technical training here in the state again. We need to add some of that cybersecurity training and the jobs so that we can get our young people in a position where they can earn a decent living when they get out of school. And we need to improve the educational process. According to the State Board of Education right now, only 25 cents of every dollar that Marylanders spend on education actually makes it into the classroom. Now that means 75 cents of every dollar is being spent on overhead and administrative costs. That's ridiculous. And it's no wonder our kids can't read and do math. We've got school, there is no high school in Baltimore City, no public high school in Baltimore City that has had a student in the past 2 years be able to pass the basic math and reading test on grade level as a senior. I see that as a problem. A Maryland high school diploma is absolutely worthless if you can't read it.
Correct.
And no Maryland business is going to hire a Maryland high school graduate who can't make change for a dollar. You know, these are basic skills. We need to get our teachers back in the classrooms teaching basic skills, teaching math, teaching reading, teaching the 3 R's. Now, again, unlike our current governor, I am a product of the Maryland education system, public education. I got a decent education. I can read. I can do math. I can find Maryland on a map. Most of our high school graduates can't. I see that as a problem. And we can fix it. I will have Dr. Cham lead our efforts to rebuild the Maryland education system to make it one of the best systems in the country. And we can do it. The money's there. The money's always been there. It's just been misused.
How do we figure out when we misusing our money, we look at public safety? Public safety is a huge issue for Maryland. You know, right now the numbers, some people say the numbers are kind of miscued based on, you know, reclassifying the categories of how you rate the crime, how you classify the crime. How do we ensure public safety for the people of Maryland?
Well, and again, a great question. Part of that, I mean, I talk to sheriffs, and of course, public safety, being a former deputy sheriff, public safety is kind of near and dear to my heart. You know, I talk to sheriffs and chiefs of police from across the state. Baltimore County, which surrounds Baltimore City, Baltimore County's chief of police told me they are 300 officers short in that county right now. Their 911 response time is now 27 minutes. That's a lifetime, literally, if you call 911. It's gotten so bad out there, they're so short-handed that they are actually handling some of their 911 calls by calling the people back and trying to resolve it on the phone so that they don't send an officer out to the location. That's crazy. And they're all telling me that it's because they can't afford to hire and retain highly qualified officers. Well, the money's there. The Maryland State Lottery, when it was passed originally, the money is statutorily supposed to go to 2 places, public schools and public safety. For example, last year, the Maryland Lottery brought in $1.6 billion in tax revenue. Every single dime of that went into the Maryland General Fund to cover that deficit we talked about. Not one dime went to public safety or public schools. Same way with casino revenues. That money is supposed to go to those 2 places too. Last year, that was $841 million. That all went into the general fund, not one dime to public safety or public schools, in violation of Maryland law. Who's responsible for that? The person who writes the budget. And in this state, that's the governor. The governor submits a budget, the General Assembly debates it, they can change it and modify it, but ultimately he still has to sign off on it. And he's been signing off on things that violate Maryland law and basically screw our children out of a future and our communities out of being safe. Another big public safety issue here in the state of Maryland is the General Assembly wanting to, and the governor, for that matter, wanting to cancel the 287G program throughout the state. That's the agreement that counties can engage in with the Department of Homeland Security, so that when someone is arrested for any crime, when they're booked into the jail under the 287G program, the corrections personnel there, when they're doing the booking, would then run them for their immigration status. And if they find that those people are here illegally, they then simply notify ICE and give ICE 48 hours to come and get them. If ICE so desires to come and get them, the transfer is made in the jail in a safe environment, and those people are taken out of our communities, not to be a problem anymore. This governor and this General Assembly want to cancel that program. Right now, 9 counties in Maryland participate in the 287G program. Out of the 24 jurisdictions, only 9 do it. And they want to cut that. And in those 9 counties where they're participating, crime is exponentially lower than it is in the rest of the state. I wonder why. The other thing is, you see the problems in Minnesota right now, in Minneapolis.
Correct.
With ICE agents having to be out on the street to chase down criminal aliens. Well, you don't have to send ICE agents into the streets to chase down criminal aliens if you're turning criminal aliens over to them when they commit crimes in your community. Here in Maryland, we've had some very high-profile criminal incidents committed by criminal illegal aliens over the past couple of years. The Rachel Morin murder, more recently the Dakara Thompson murder here in Prince George's County. We had a young man, a 14-year-old, whose body was found in College Park near the University of Maryland, who was murdered by 4 illegal alien gangbangers. And this is like in the past 2 weeks.
Wow.
These are crimes that would not have been committed if these criminal illegal aliens weren't roaming our communities. And here in Prince George's County, we're a sanctuary county. So even if these individuals would have been apprehended here, they wouldn't have been turned over to ICE. They'd still be here. And in one particular case from 2024, here in Prince George's County, a 2-year-old was shot and killed as an innocent bystander in a drive-by shooting. That shooting was perpetrated by an illegal alien who had previously been in custody here in Prince George's County. He had been released. ICE had never been notified that he was in custody. Had ICE been notified, that 2-year-old would still be alive. That 2-year-old would be 4 now and would still be alive and thriving. These are problems that don't need to be there. And we need a governor and a General Assembly who's serious about protecting Marylanders, not criminal aliens.
Well said. When we talk about fraud, especially Medicaid fraud, how do we get a handle on that in Maryland? How do we have some accountability, and and once we find the fraud, what do we do with it?
Well, one of the major problems here in Maryland is we don't have an inspector general's office at the state level. Now, keep in mind, every state around us, Delaware, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, and Virginia, they all have state inspector generals. Those state inspector generals have investigative and subpoena powers. They can also refer cases when they find fraud for criminal prosecution. Maryland doesn't have an inspector general, never has. We have what we call the Office of Legislative Audits here, which works for the General Assembly. Now, they can audit programs, they can find fraud, and all they can do is write a report about it and hope somebody does something with it. And in this particular case, they've written, they're the ones who came up with the numbers on the unemployment fraud that we talked about earlier. They're the ones who found the $400 massages that were being charged to the state by an employee. They're the ones who have found Medicaid and SNAP benefit fraud in the state, but they can't do anything about it. So I'm an advocate for creating a Maryland Office of the Inspector General, like the other states around us, where they would have investigative and subpoena powers. And when they find these fraud cases, they would be able to refer them in conjunction with the Attorney General for prosecution at either the state or the federal level, depending on the fraud. They would also be able to go after recovering some of that money. This is taxpayer money we're talking about. And again, people throw numbers around at the state level like they mean nothing. $1 million here, 300 million there, like it doesn't matter. $300 million is, to me at least, is a significant amount of money. $1 million is a significant amount of money. I think most Marylanders would agree with me on that,
Yes,
especially
sir.
when that money is coming out of their pocket.
Yes.
If you stem the fraud, if you prosecute fraud, you build a deterrence against fraud. Start prosecuting some of these fraud cases, and people who commit fraud will think twice about doing it if they know there's real consequences. That's why we have criminal code to begin with. That's why we lock up criminals and don't just let them roam the streets free, to deter them from doing it again, to deter others from doing it. We don't have that ability here in Maryland. So I recently wrote an op-ed piece for publication. It actually went out this week in some of the Maryland newspapers, advocating for the creation of an Inspector General's office so that we can not only get a handle. It's wonderful that the Office of Legislative Affairs is finding the fraud. We need to do something about it. And if you don't have a governor who's interested in being a good steward of the public trust, then you get what we have now.
When we talk about our elderly and looking out for them, eliminating income tax, eliminating property tax, excuse me, like once you get over the age of 65, you're no longer required to pay your property tax. What are your plans as it relates to looking out for our elderly and making sure that they're taken care of once they hit retirement age?
Right. Well, Brenda and I have traveled all over the state of Maryland. We did over 400 events last year and in all 24 Maryland jurisdictions. And we talked to over 150,000 Marylanders one-on-one. And every retiree we talked to complained about the cost of living here and the fact that it's too expensive to retire in Maryland. Well, when retirees leave our state for greener pastures, oftentimes they take their families with them. Well, these are taxpayers. And all that does is bleed tax dollars from the state of Maryland. Other states around us have programs to protect their seniors, and we think some of those are really good ideas. Brenda and I will introduce legislation to make all retirement income Maryland income tax exempt here in Maryland. Other states around us do this, and it's a very negligible effect on the bottom line, but it does so much to help our retirees. We also want to make state property taxes exempt for your principal residence if you're a homeowner over the age of 65. Because Maryland homeowners and seniors should never have to make a choice between paying the property taxes on a residence that they've lived in their entire lives or paying the electric bill, which is out of control here in Maryland too.
If people want to ask additional questions, get in contact with you, make a donation to your campaign, how can they do so?
Absolutely. They can, if they want to ask questions, they want to look at our platforms, which are laid out on these issues in detail on our website. It is John Myrick for mdgovernor.org. Again, that's John Myrick for mdgovernor.org. On there, they can read about the issues. They can read about our proposals to solve some of these problems. They can ask a question. They can look at our schedule of events where we're going to be at so they can come out and talk to us. They can send a note or a comment or a question through the website. And when they do that, those notes and comments come directly to me. They don't go to my staff. They come to me directly. Because if you take your time to ask a question of the person that's seeking your vote, you deserve an answer from the person seeking your vote, not from a staffer. There's a phone number on our website, and much to my beautiful wife's dismay, that phone number is not a campaign phone number. That phone number is my personal cell phone. Same reason. if you're taking your time to want to ask a question, you deserve an answer from me, not my staff. You can also donate to our campaign through the website. There's a donate button. There's donate buttons all over the website, quite frankly, because campaigns cost money. And this is fixing to be the most expensive governor's race in Maryland history, in US history, actually, from what we hear. So it's going to take a lot to make this happen. And we are trying our best not to take large donations from corporations. We've actually turned down PAC money and money from companies, large donations from companies, because we don't want to be beholden to that money. We work for the people of the state of Maryland. We would rather those contributions come in $5, $10, $25, $50 amounts from people who in Maryland who believe in our campaign and who believe that they deserve better than we would taking it from corporations who are going to ask favors on the back end of that. That's politics. That's not public service.
Correct. If people, well, let me say it this way. Why should the people of Maryland vote for you as the next governor?
Quite frankly, again, because Maryland deserves better. Maryland deserves a governor who's interested in being governor, who's not looking for the next rung up on the ladder like this governor and the two before him, quite frankly. So I don't just blame him. A Republican governor and a former Democrat governor did the same thing. So they ran for president too. So Maryland deserves a governor who wants to be governor. They deserve a public servant, not a politician. They deserve some integrity, someone that will tell them the truth, even when it's not a very good look. They deserve someone who can lead. I've spent my entire career leading agencies from small 4-man teams to major agencies with almost 1,000 people working for me directly at those points. We need leadership. We need somebody who's willing to work with other people. I've worked in 3 different White Houses, 2 Democrat, 1 Republican. I can work and will work with anyone for the benefit of Maryland because that's the job of the governor. I will work with our General Assembly, with the Democrat supermajority leadership down there for the benefit of all Marylanders. Because, again, that's what a governor is supposed to do. Public servant and public service is about doing what's right, not doing what's politically expedient. And Maryland, for far too long, has had political expedience over doing what's right. It's time to change that. And if Marylanders are happy with what they've got, keep voting the same way. If you like high taxes, if you like a high cost of living, right now we pay the highest electric cost in the country. If you like that, if you like poor schools, if you like unsafe streets, keep voting the same way. If any of those things bother you, maybe it's time to look at voting for somebody else. Maybe it's time to look at our campaign, at a campaign that's looking to do what's right for you. That's the bottom line. I'm not doing this because I need another job. I've retired twice. I'm working as a consultant now. And honestly, I'm going to take a 50% pay cut to become governor of Maryland. That does not throw my wife in one little bit. But the bottom line is it's necessary because you're either part of the solution or you are part of the problem. And
Right.
I cannot sit back and will not sit back and watch this state go further down the tubes and do nothing about it. That's not how I was raised. That's not how I've lived my life. That's not how I've spent my life serving this country and this state. And I will not sit back and watch that happen if I can fix it. And I know we can fix it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. John Myrick, candidate for governor of Maryland. John, thank you for your time. Best of luck to you in your campaign.
Julian, thanks for having me on.